Have you ever wondered what it'd be like if Pokemon existed, and what they would look like if Kirby were to absorb them all? Well, you've come to the perfect place. But there's so many Pokemon out there, how could I possibly decide who Kirby absorbs first? Okay, yes, it's Psyduck. I'm making Kirby absorb Psyduck. Why? Because trying to think of all the possible Pokemon I could have started the series off with was giving me a headache. So it only made sense to make Kirby absorb a Pokemon that would give him a headache as well. After indenting some holes, I added this pre-baked egg-shaped clay for Psyduck's eyes, and glued some pre-baked black sprinkle-like shapes for his hair. Pre-baking small details like these help make sure they maintain their shape and don't get deformed. Now to paint his pinpoint eyes that seem so vacant, as if he has no clue how he ended up in this situation. With the Psyduck hat finished, I can place Kirby's hands over it as if he's holding his head in pain and paint his face to match. With Psyduck Kirby finished, it's time to sculpt the next Pokemon mashup, Gengar. Using the perfect Gengar shade of purple clay, I pressed it onto a pre-baked Kirby shape, sort of creating a bowl haircut. Adding in these cone-shaped spikes and blending them in was my needle tool. And repeating that process with some smaller spikes. Next, I indented some space to add Gengar's pre-baked red eyes. I was planning to stop the sculpting portion of Gengar here, but I felt like it was too simplistic, so I continued the spikes on the back. With the sculpting portion of Gengar complete, I finished sculpting Kirby by adding his arms with some Bacon Bond. I wanted to make him with his arms up, as if he was in the middle of an evil laugh after completing one of his pranks. Instead of painting on his mouth, I decided to make him with his tongue sticking out with clay, since I want Kirby to copy Gengar's mischievous personality as well. Finally, I painted on the rest of the details. To continue this trend of nostalgic Gen 1 Pokemon, I had to make Kirby absorb Snorlax next. But instead of making him as a hat like the other Pokemon mashups, I wanted to make his as a onesie, using Animal Kirby as a reference for my design. A Snorlax hat would have been cute on its own, but I wanted to include his paws in the design. So sit back and enjoy this premium Snorlax feet content you probably can't find anywhere else. Alright, enough of the weird stuff. Now to repeat the process for his arms, which I want to be positioned with an arm resting on his belly. And I definitely did not just realize he's missing ears, so I added and blended those in as well. Back to finishing up Snorlax with a manicure using some pre-baked little cones I'm using for his claws. Finally, I painted on the final details. This next mashup might seem a little random. You could say I was drawn to the choice like a magnet. It's Magnemite. I'm making Kirby Magnemite. I thought this would be a good chance to use some metallic clay I haven't had the chance to use yet. even though I realized it would have been much easier to use some actual Phillips head screws instead of making it out of clay. But that would be cheating. After baking the screws, I attached it with some Bacon Bond and finished sculpting the rest of Kirby by adding his arms. Next, it's time to make the large horseshoe magnets. I'm pressing it against these popsicle sticks to get an even thickness before cutting out a more detailed shape. I've been wanting to use these mini magnets I've had for a while now, and I had the idea to make these horseshoe magnets actually work. After making imprints in the clay, I took the magnets out and glued them back in place after baking the clay. I'm using these pearlescent paints for the tips of the magnet because I think it helps give it a metallic look. Also, it might be difficult to see, but the entire Magnemite hat has a metallic shine to it. I wanted it to look like this hat was completely made out of metal. Finally, with Kirby's face painted, this mashup is finished and it works. The last one in this Gen 1 Pokemon series is known as the Lonely Pokemon, Cubone, so it kind of makes sense that he's the last one to this party. I went ahead and painted his face. Actually, I had a hard time deciding on a design for this one in general. I was in between making Cubone with his skull as the hat, or just making his skull as the hat. I ended up going with the later design because I feel like it was more along the lines of what an official mashup would look like. Using aluminum foil I formed into a Cubone-like head, I covered it with an off-white sheet of clay, trimming off and adding pieces where needed. Honestly, I'm just playing around with it until it looks somewhat close to Cubone's skull. Luckily, that's a good thing with clay. I can continue adding and cutting off pieces until I'm happy with the result. Nothing's finalized until I bake it. Fortunately, I'm not sure how, but it ended up working out okay, and it definitely looks good enough. After baking, I removed the aluminum foil and glued it to Kirby's head. The last step is to coat all of them in UV resin for some extra gloss and protection. After curing with UV light, they're finally finished, and here's the reveal. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and comment below which was your favorite Kirby Mon from this series, and what kind of series you'd like to see next.